Now, let's talk about one area where Africa business interests are growing globally. What is called the rise and continuous rising of the contemporary African art.
More rising, right? So virtually everywhere you go these days, in London, New York, and elsewhere, you're likely to find yet another auction or sale of African art. And beyond Europe and America, as demand increases for African art, the work of contemporary African artists can be seen in exhibitions around the globe. From Lagos to Johannesburg, Hong Kong to Sydney, the world of African fine art, beautiful sculptures, and evocative imagery is all the rage. But of course, as art dealers will tell you, aesthetics aside, it's really the money that's doing the talking here, with African art now highly sought after and being seen as a worthy investment.
That's an interesting one. All right, well, for more on the international rise of contemporary African art, earlier, art writer and curator of modern and contemporary African art, Sharon Obuobi, joined our colleague, Thamsa Gazu, in London. He began by asking her why there was a rise in demand for African art.
Take a look.
That's a very good question. I think it's a number of things. In any market, you need it has to be an ecosystem, and so you need different factors that contribute to growth. And so for the African arts section of this market, we start to see the growth of art fairs, museums showing work by African artists, as well, galleries that have also been starting as well. And so all these elements have been adding to a momentum that's been building in the market. And then also in the auction space, so Sotheby's, where we started the sale of African art, and also in Bonhams, and even beyond that across the world, there have been auction houses in South Africa, in Nigeria, in France, and so that all of this has, been pushing that momentum for the industry.
Right, you have been doing this for a while, and
yes.
When you look back, most of the discussions that we have been having was that art is like branding.
Yes.
There's no reason why something should sell more just because it's a Picasso, and then probably there's somebody who is brilliant in the
Yes.
Democratic Republic of Congo, that somebody, because that name is not known,
Yeah.
that product probably doesn't sell as much. But how do you see this rise in African art
Yeah.
taking that place? Is it because they just go for any African art, or they are going for specific people who are already big names in the business?
Well, I mean, in the wider art market, we value art based on different things. So art is valued based on where it's been exhibited, the artist's history, and so there is also a credibility for the artists based on the work they've been doing and where they've been seen, who's collected their work. And so in the same way, in the African space as well, there have been artists that have been able to have this exposure, been shown in museums, been collected, and so whenever you've had a collecting history, that's what adds value to a work. It's also about, if we want to speak more go into more detail, when we value work, it can be about the medium, the material that's been used, the dates when it was created, what school of arts it was part of, and the cultural significance as well. So there are all these factors that we look at to value work.
I don't want to be controversial, but you will have, like in the United Kingdom, street arts,
Yes.
people like Banksy and others,
Yes.
and the laws and the reasons why some of them stay behind the scenes and do their art at night.
Yes.
But we see that in Africa, there's actually a rise in that. When you
Yes.
look at some of the work that has been done in Dakar and
Yes.
other places,
Yes.
How is that viewed? Is it mostly Western art lovers going to Africa for these,
Yeah.
or they will be protest-based? Are
Yeah.
they appreciated over there? What's the value in street art in Africa now?
Street art, there's actually, if you want to talk about it, academically, there's the artists of, the work of artists, street artists, and there's also artists that maybe were academically trained in fine art, and there's also conceptual contemporary artists, and so it varies. If we're talking about street art, it depends on the kind of exposure they've had and also, again, exhibition history. So one good example of that would be Sherry Samba, who's from Congo. And Sherry Samba is a street artist who has exhibited widely in Paris,
France,
especially. And it's just about having that opportunity to exhibit and to be seen. And so we're hoping that with the work that we continue to do in exhibiting work by artists from across the continent, that we were able to spotlight more of these artists consistently over time.
Right. There is an issue that is trending in art.
Yes.
This is what we are talking about, art that was maybe borrowed from Africa. This is the word they use.
Are you talking about the traditional?
Talking about there was looting during the colonial times.
Okay, so the traditional
There's a lot that has
masks,
been taken from Benin City, from Zimbabwe, including the Zimbabwe bed.
Yeah.
A lot in Ethiopia in particular. So most of that art is actually in the galleries in the West and in America, and Berlin, London in particular.
Yeah.
And the West have said that this art needs to be enjoyed by the world, and it is stored in the Western galleries because this is where people come, and yet Africa is being said to be maybe most people are saying Africa doesn't have the places or the ability or the capacity to actually look after this art so that people can actually go there and enjoy what art offers.
So what you're speaking of is the anthropological side of art. So what you would describe as the masks, the sculptures, what would have been traditionally used by our ancestors in ceremonies, as culturally significant objects. That is different from what we see today with paintings and installations, and that's also a different market. So at Sotheby's we had different departments and at different galleries. You'll see the galleries that focus on traditional works, and then galleries that focus on the modern and contemporary. For the traditional works that you were speaking of, it's quite a debatable topic because these objects are culturally significant, and so there have been people that have been pushing for repatriation of these objects. And so the other side of the debate is, can we take care of these objects? What is being done to maintain it? But then I think what's interesting about that is also with the movie, the Black Panther movie, that comments on that as well. So I think it's a double-edged sword, and also a conversation that has multiple perspectives on that. I think that there are people that are pushing to do that. One person that's been very vocal about this is Sindika Dukolo, and also DJ Class, someone who's also been involved in the markets for traditional works. But I think it's quite complicated. And I know the French president, Macron, made a statement about lending works back to museums, which I thought
I guess where most people are, they will be saying that if these things were back in Africa, if these galleries and maybe all these artifacts, all this artwork in the modern days can actually be available to be seen in Africa, then more people will actually go there and appreciate that Africa actually has a very long history of coming up with brilliant art, and then mix that with the modern artist, modern day artist, because what we were talking about before, where African art is not valued as much as Monet or anybody else in the West, because most people don't realize how long Africans have actually been doing this. So you people as curators, how difficult is it for you to draw people to the history that Africa has?
I think there is a growing interest, and there are dedicated collectors and dedicated followers of art from Africa, and I say that sometimes I struggle to use the word Africa, like African art, because of course we're talking about a continent, so there's no singular definition. But I think in terms of, I'm very passionate about doing things on the continent. So, exhibitions on the continent, museums on the continent, that's very important because it's also about presenting that narrative in a way that is representative and also relevant to the continent, with people that are local. I think the challenge is infrastructure. as well. So I think one government, I mean, the Senegalese government have been doing really, really well with that, with the Dakar Biennale, consistently. There's also been the Bamako photo encounters, in Mali. And so we're looking to see more and more of that. People are starting initiatives. The Museum Makal in Morocco. All of these things, I think, are very, very important for rebuilding that infrastructure, because what we had years ago were these museums that we had that housed traditional works, but over time that was not maintained. And so even though there have been initiatives by the UN to, rehabilitate these institutions, there's a lack of funding, there's a lack of consistency in that area. So it's something I'm very passionate about, but I think there's also a lot of work to be done in rebuilding that infrastructure.
Sharon, it's modern day journalism. We tend to have a lot of people on Twitter and on social media talking. Most people saying they haven't heard about you before or the work that you do. Surprised how eloquent you are in this particular field. Okay. Maybe we can just take a step back.
Okay.
Tell them how you got to be in this field.
Okay.
And probably a little bit more about your work as a curator in the field.
Great. So I'm Ghanaian, born Ghanaian, and born into a family of artists. So my dad's an artist. I have uncles and aunts who were creatives as well. And so I studied in business, actually, as my first academic direction. But I've been very interested in the arts over the years, and so started off writing as a writer, documenting the stories of artists and curators, and that has consistently been the point at which I connect with the art world in terms of documenting the stories of people that work in the arts. And so from there, I've worked with museums, I've worked with galleries, I worked with the Student Museum in New York, I worked with some galleries in Nigeria, and I've also recently, been with Sotheby's in London, and then now working independently as a consultant on a variety of projects. And what I went back to was the series of interviews, and so every week I release a new episode with a new artist, and over time that's been a really, really interesting way to document the stories of artists, because I find that sometimes people see art and they just see it as an object, but they don't really know much about the human being behind the work that was made. And I think that art is a very powerful way to connect people, especially from different backgrounds. And so I think what's really powerful is that if you can have an artwork and we can look at it and we can say, what does it mean? And we can have a conversation that we might not have otherwise had. I think that's very powerful. And so that's
some of the interviews that you've done with quite a number of artists, and something appears to me, I don't know, but what appears to be coming through is a lot of the African artists don't tend to be the ones making most of the money from their material.
Yeah.
So how is that handled? How is that? How do you see it as a curator in the industry?
In terms of the money side of it, I think it's a number of factors. If we talk about the markets as a whole, the global art markets, the distribution of transactions, about 20% happens in the US, another 20% on average in the UK, and then the other 20% in Asia and Hong Kong. And then the remaining 1% is what happens in African artists. And so the African art market is really, really small. And if you look at the distribution of sales, auctions and galleries, it's very small. I think that also translates into the opportunities with galleries that artists have. But I think what's exciting is that we're starting to see more artists being represented internationally. And I think that's why there's an opportunity for more development with the infrastructure, with galleries and people buying more actively. But I think that's an area that's that could be improved for sure. And
so, what needs to be done? Is it the governments that need to come up with something to support these artists? Is it the industry that needs to support the artists? Is it people like you as curators who need to make sure they are looked after? Because you can say that about footballers.
Yeah.
In the old days, African footballers before George Weah didn't earn much from football.
Yeah.
But nowadays, you would struggle to find an African player who is not earning as much as a European player in football. So you can say the same about artists. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the product and the quality of the artists. but it is just that they don't have the opportunity to be in the right places and for their products to actually sell as much as others would during the auction.
I think it's also about inclusion, so including works by African artists in the wider segments. I think sometimes we tend to categorize artists and say these are African artists, but I think we should include more artists of African descent in exhibitions in anywhere in Asia, in North America. And I think by doing that we put these artists on the same level as anybody else, and I think that's when you start to demand the same level of prices as you would for, let's say, an artist from Britain, for example. I think that's where you start to see more of that. But I think if we continue to restrict and only look at artists, only say that they're African artists and limit it to that, I think that can also be a challenge. So it's about think about it as an ecosystem, more opportunities for African artists in the global scale, and also governments supporting with programs with the infrastructure. Because if you think of the UK here, there's so many institutions, so many art programs, and that's really important for helping emerge young artists to develop. And then when they get to a level that they are,
But you were telling me that you're already doing that.
Yes.
So tell me about the shows that are coming up and why that is important for Africa.
Yes, well, from my perspective, it's about promotion, it's about awareness, and so I'm putting on some shows. I've got a show coming up in Germany soon, and also working on projects like that, so consulting for galleries that need help to redesign their program, also working on one-on-one with artists to figure out their strategies going forward, and just being more hands-on with that. I really enjoy, being involved, and I think coming from a business perspective as well, being able to combine art and business is something that is not always easy to find, and so it's something that I'm very passionate about. And so the podcast is a really good way to educate and to share the stories of artists, and I think from that everything else follows.
So if there's a young artist somewhere in some village in Nigeria, brilliant, or maybe in some place in Kenya, Uganda, or Eswatini, who would want to get access to the markets, or at least somebody to advise him or her in terms of evaluating their work and making sure that they have direction. How do they really get to people like you?
The internet is a wonderful thing. I think the internet is making it more easy to access information. I can give my, I'm on Instagram and Twitter at Rose of Sharon O. And so I think being able to reach out to people, send a tweet, send a message. These are the ways you can also engage with people, because people are online and looking at work online, and collectors are online. Everybody wants to see what's happening, and it's an easy way to access and get information.